Any fear can be conquered, but I think most of the time, a true fear, a true phobia, you're not going to be able to just get rid of that easily. And if it's something that is debilitating to you or something that you want to overcome, you should expect that it's going to take some time.
Our minds are really, really powerful. I think it is a practice. Whether you are able to overcome it in a day or whether it takes you a year, it's going to continue to be a practice. Hello and welcome to Full Circle, the Magic Mindset Podcast. I am Leah Lilly, one of your hosts, and I am joined as always by my co-host Matt Carlberg. We aim to bridge the gap between my study of astrology and Matt's study of psychology and sociology. Each week we discuss a specific theme and approach it from two different perspectives to come to a deeper understanding from both an astrological and psychological perspective.
If you missed out on any of our previous episodes, you can catch up at leahlilly.com/Full Circle Podcast or on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube by searching for Full Circle Podcast. When I was a kid, I had a recurring nightmare of Jim Carrey's The Mask, except the cartoon version, and I would be hiding in the family room underneath the coffee table, and Jim Carrey would walk past as the mask, and he would like kind of moonwalk backwards and then look at me, just turn his head really fast and look at me. And it's really all I remember of the dream. But I remember being terrified, and I had it over and over and over and over again until my grandma came to visit us, and she emptied my pillowcase out into a paper bag, and she took it home and she fed my nightmare to her dog named Nefer. And I never had the dream ever again. And I think it's a really excellent little anecdote to get us started on our theme for this week, which is fear. And I think today we'll come to a better understanding of what fear is. And hopefully you'll walk away feeling like you know how to combat that fear and hopefully move on from it.
Welcome to the first full week of Scorpio season. I've heard all kinds of different feelings around this season, everything from excitement to dread to no idea what Scorpio season even holds. Over the next few weeks, I want to explore a specific quality that makes up Scorpio so that you come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of this season and some of the components that make it the magical, mystical sign that it is. The quality of Scorpio I want to explore today is just that, mystery. The official definition of mystery is something that is difficult or impossible to understand or explain. And I love that the example sentence that's given is the mysteries of outer space. That makes me super happy. But mystery encompasses the unexplained and the things we can't exactly put words around. It piques our curiosity and beckons us to explore. And I think this really ties in well with our theme this week because what often stops us from learning more or uncovering the mysterious is fear. A lot of people hear Scorpio season and about its often intangible qualities and instantly feel intimidated or afraid. While our hunger for depth and knowledge of mystery increases this season, try to treat it with wonder and curiosity. Everything is not always explained, but trusting in yourself, believing that everything happening in your life is happening for you and not to you, and remembering that everything happening is all for your highest good, are tools you can use to help you accept the mysterious ways of life. Our first instinct is to solve, to get to the bottom of things, to understand, and sometimes life just doesn't work that way. How can you let the unexplained in your life play out like a magic trick that dazzles and amazes you rather than perplexes and distresses you? Answers will be revealed in their own time. So trust the process and trust that Scorpio season will reveal to you what you need to know. On October 31st, Halloween, we see Mercury going retrograde in Scorpio until November 20th. A planet goes retrograde when it appears to be moving backwards in the sky. And this is all an optical illusion, as Mercury is actually just moving slower than the Earth. But retrogrades are known to influence what most have heard or assumed to be negative effects. It's sometimes very easy to lean into and blame the chaos that Mercury in retrograde seems to cause. That is, if you're not ready for it or if it catches you off guard. So just a reminder, Mercury is the planet that rules communication, teaching, learning, processing information, and indicates how we best learn and analyze information. So retrogrades may cause scheduling problems, miscommunications at work, travel delays or work delays, misunderstandings, or even disagreements with people and in the situations around you. Your mind might feel a little bit foggy some days. It may feel like an uphill battle trying to think or process through things. And Mercury in Scorpio is going to test our depths of intimacy. This could be sexual intimacy, financial intimacy, or even emotional intimacy. Truths will be revealed and flaws are bound to come to light, so prepare yourself for the truth. Your intimacy with these things can also deepen at this time. So if you come to the table with openness, compassion, and understanding, you can set the groundwork for positive change. It's time to get intimate with your partner, close friends, money, or your sexual side, and learn about how to move forward without venom, blame, or harsh words. If you let yourself be vulnerable, curious, and avoid blame, you won't go wrong. We also see Venus enter Sagittarius on November 1st, which asks us how we want to incorporate exploration and growth in our relationships. This transit encourages us to find ways to grow and learn with others. Venus in Scorpio focused on intimacy and intricacy within our close relationships. But with Venus's move into Sagittarius, we now look at love on a grander scale. Scorpio was our zoom in, Sagittarius is our zoom out. Looking at the bigger picture, Venus in Sagittarius asks us how we want to explore, adventure, grow, and play with others.
We talked about Halloween coming up and some of the things that will be occurring astrologically then. And I was wondering if the holidays that we celebrate are related to the astrological seasons or if one has an effect on the other.
I would say that some holidays coincide with the astrological season that they're in and some don't. So for example, Halloween coming up coincides really well with Scorpio season. It's got some of that mystery and the spookiness that I think Scorpio just naturally has as a sign. But for instance, like Valentine's Day falls during Aquarius season, and Aquarius is not the first sign that you think of when you think of love. Maybe Leo season might be a little bit more like associated with that. And so if Valentine's Day were during Leo season, might see a little bit more of a spike in those greeting cards and roses and things like that. So some do, and some kind of fall at a funky time. But I think that's just because of the Western holiday calendar, and other cultures' holidays might fit better into the astrological calendar. I'd be very curious about that. You talked a little bit in our intro today about a nightmare, a reoccurring nightmare that you had as a kid. I'm curious what you were afraid of as a child.
I don't know what I was actually afraid of when I was a kid. I probably didn't have a lot of the healthy fears that I should have. We've talked about some of the things, grabbing electrical fences and things like that I was doing as a kid. But I do remember being really afraid of public speaking, actually. In the 4th grade, during Black History Month, we all got assigned a person, a historical figure from the civil rights movement that we needed to, present on. And I had my poster all made up with construction paper and everything for Malcolm X. was giving a presentation on Malcolm X. Very interesting life, actually. And I remember sitting in my seat. My teacher said, Matt, it's your turn. And I couldn't do it. And I wouldn't get up there and I wouldn't talk through it. I wouldn't do anything. And I don't remember if I cried or not, but I do remember being really embarrassed that I couldn't do it. My mom was one of my fourth grade teachers. So she found out about it. It's a big deal. And I was not able to get in front of people and speak comfortably really until partway through high school. It was the first time I was able to kind of conquer that fear.
Didn't you do like speech or debate in high school?
Yeah, so that was definitely the first time that I conquered it. There were a couple other presentations in middle school that did not go so hot. And then I don't know what changed. I don't honestly know what changed, but I did kick it in high school and I was able to get up in front of people and talk. And now I do it for a living and we do it on the podcast and it's all history now.
Yeah, I would have never known.
What about you? What was kind of your overarching fear of childhood?
I was afraid of the dark. So, like walking into any spaces with darkness or going, like turning off all the lights downstairs and going upstairs in the dark. I was like, there's no way. I can't do that. Always has to be a light on. And I don't remember when I finally grew out of that, but I did. And the other one that's really vivid was being kidnapped. And I don't know if it was just where I lived or what, but I feel like our whole community was very adamant about like there was like tales of the white van, and if you saw the white van, like it was kidnappers coming to get you, and like my mom was very hesitant about us walking home by ourselves from school and things like that. And I remember, especially when we went down to my dad's house because my parents were divorced, and so I went between houses. And I remember when I would sleep at my dad's house, and I don't know if it was because there were fewer people in the house or what, but I was always so afraid that my sister was going to get kidnapped in the middle of the night. And the Elizabeth Smart thing happened when I was still very young, and that freaked me out. And so I remember always when we shared a bed, and even when we didn't, I would always sleep with my foot touching her so that if on the off chance somebody was going to come and grab her, maybe I could feel it and like take care of her. But I was terrified of that for a long time. And I don't remember when that finally subsided either, maybe middle school, but I remember those early elementary school years being terrified of being kidnapped.
What a heavy fear for a child to be carrying around. This week's featured business is Living Earthy.
Owner Kendall is an intuitive transformation coach, energy healer, and herbalist. She's on a mission to help people reconnect to the earth and their souls to bring greater collective expansion. She provides immersive experiences that support spiritual or woo-curious women to get unstuck, step into confidence and clarity, and create momentum toward the impact they wish to have in the world.
She makes handmade herbal remedies, including tea blends, essential oil blends, and facial steams. She also makes abalone jewelry.
If you want to check her out or learn more about her services or see her products, you can find her at www.livingearthy.com or through the links in our show notes.
I think in general, the academic segment this time is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster. I think the reason for that is we often think of fear as a very negative thing, something to be avoided, something that makes us uncomfortable. But I think it can actually be a very good thing as well. It represents some growth opportunities, and it, in some cases, can, not to be dramatic, save our lives or, save us from danger in some capacity at least. So really what I want to do today from the psychology perspective is break down where our fear comes from, understand what is actually happening inside of our bodies when we are afraid, and then use that biological response to understand how we can fix the fear. I'll put fix in air quotes. So the first thing is, how do we get these fears? There's three basic ways. One is instinct, one is learned, and one is taught. So for example, instinct is just kind of that evolutionary fear. The idea that, I was afraid of snakes, which made me more likely to pass on my genetic material. And so now there's just kind of this bred in fear of snakes that I think we all get. I remember being a kid and I was terrified of gardener snakes, even though, I don't think that they could hurt you if they wanted to. But I was afraid of them because it was a snake. The next one is learned. And the example I have here is Batman. The idea is that a person has a traumatic experience and then develops a phobia of that experience. And the traumatic experience I'm talking about, just realized, Bruce Wayne's parents got killed. Spoiler alert. That's not the traumatic experience I'm talking about. I'm talking about in The Dark Knight, when he fell in that well with all those bats, and then he was afraid of bats, and then he used that fear of bats to become Batman. That's the type of phobia that is learned. Like, an experience happened, and he learned a fear from that experience. The last type of fear is taught. It's not something that happened to us. It's not something that is just kind of in our genes. It's things like the fear of failure. And that type of stuff is taught to us by our parents, our friends, our teachers, whoever it may be, whether they mean to or not, are putting that fear inside of us. It could be a variety of things, but I think the easiest example here is fear of failure. So biologically, and this is the first time in this podcast, at least I think, that we are going to get down to what's actually happening inside of your body in response to the psychological concept that we're talking about. Fear starts in the amygdala, and the amygdala is part of your brain, and it is responsible for emotions. So fear triggers a response in the amygdala, which then releases stress hormones and activates the sympathetic nervous system. And really quick aside here, you have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is just making sure that your body does the things that it needs to do, like keeping your heart beating and making your stomach digest and doing all that kind of stuff. Whereas sympathetic is your fight or flight response. So when the sympathetic nervous system fires, it does a whole bunch of things. It gives you a lot of stress hormones. It gets adrenaline flowing. It's why when we feel afraid, we get sweaty, we get antsy, we get anxious. Sometimes we can start to get this really sick feeling in the pit of our stomach, and that's your body has too much adrenaline and you don't know what to do with it. So you're just kind of dumping it off. So using this biological response, there are a couple different ways that we can deal with fear. The first one, and in general, I'm not a huge take meds to fix your problems, but there is medication available that disrupts, it's called a glucocorticoid receptor. And essentially those receptors are in your brain. They just take basically the adrenaline, and that's what triggers those responses for you. So if we block those receptors, it means that you're not going to absorb the adrenaline, and basically that response is going to be lessened. The other thing that we can do, and I think I would typically recommend this more personally, not as a doctor or anything like that, but personally, I think that cognitive behavioral therapy is the way to go. The idea here is you're actively confronting your fear. You can use exposure therapy, systematic desensitization. There's a lot of different psychological approaches that we can take that are basically teaching your mind, hey, this thing that you're so afraid of isn't actually that dangerous. Or here are some strategies to cope with that fear. Here are some things that you can do to lessen the impact that, your amygdala is having on the rest of your body. I think the last thing that I want to make note of here before we move on to Leia's portion is that there's some really easy stuff that you can do that doesn't require therapy or medications. Things like journaling. A lot of people turn to religion to help deal with fear. So I think there's a lot of really practical things that we already have in our day to day lives that can help us overcome those things that we're afraid of.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really excited to look at as we dive into the astrological side of things is two different types of fear, the realistic fears we have and the unrealistic fears that we have. And fear really comes to us in all sorts of packages. Sometimes it's wrapped up and delivered to us with a neat little bow. We know what it is. We're like, oh, I recognize this. I've seen it. I felt it. And sometimes it's that duct tape shut present that somebody thinks is really funny to give you, where you really have to peel back some layers and spend some time working to understand where the basis of that fear is coming from. And I think one of the really helpful things that you can do is to notice whether your fear is realistic or unrealistic. And that's where I want to start. This woman named Jacqueline Horazad, who is a light worker and a medium and a clairvoyant, writes, always remember, realistic fear gives you energy. It motivates you to change, run, or rescue yourself from dangerous, damaging, lonely, or painful experiences. Real fear provides you with power, taking you to the next level. Unrealistic fear drains your energy, keeps you stagnant, and holds you back from reaching your fullest potential. They make you a prisoner, holding you down with locks and chains. So a little bit of categorization for us around realistic and unrealistic fears. A couple examples of unrealistic fears are going to be fear of success, fear of failure, fear of receiving love, fearing standing up for yourself, fear of rejection, commitment, loss, taking risks, and my favorite, fear of change. Realistic fears are things like hot burner, falling off of a very high cliff or building, things that we should naturally be afraid of because they protect us. So when it comes to fear in astrology and looking at fear in astrology, we get a better sight of where maybe some of these unrealistic fears come from. And where do we look? Why, the planet of boundaries, restrictions, and limits, of course. We look at Saturn. So by exploring what sign Saturn was in on the day and the time and the place that you were born, we gain a little bit of a look into where some of your natural fear lies. So in preparation for today's episode, of course, I looked at where Saturn is for Matt and I, and we happen to both have Saturn in Aquarius. And a little bit of a rundown of what that means today is going to come from Ronald C. Davidson, who wrote a text in the 1960s about astrology. And he mentions that Saturn in Aquarius means being motivated by fear of self-involvement. So not wanting people to see you as self-involved, strives to develop humanitarian ideals, detachment, deliberation, understanding of first principles, which is like understanding the seed of where something comes from, originality, and independence. So some natural fear for Matt and I is going to lie in not wanting to maybe be seen as egotistical. And where that shows up for each of us is going to be different based on the house that Saturn is in. So for me, Saturn is in the 8th house, and that has to do with transformation, shared resources, death, loss, sex, relationships. So not wanting to seem egotistical in transformation, which is very true for me. It resonates very true for me. And for Matt, we see it show up in the 3rd house, and that has to do with self-expression, communication, early childhood development. So not wanting to be seen as egotistical as you're learning to grow and communicate and as you are growing up. Having Aquarius and Saturn also says to me that we're reserved in our actions, even though we have unconventional and imaginative thoughts. We're thinking progressively differently, we're forward thinking, but we're a little bit more reserved when it comes to how to put those things out into the world, how to make them actually show up. And there's a little bit of fear in that dissonance, right, of thinking of things and then how do I put this out? And I'm afraid to put this out because it's so unconventional and different. So how do we get over this fear, right? Our astrology is going to present this stuff to us, and that can be a lot to be left with, like, here's all the problems. But there is a way to find solutions in the chart as well. So how we get over fear is bravery and courage. And where can that be found? Mars placement. So again, in preparation for today's episode, I've looked at both of our Mars placements. You've already heard a little bit about Matt and I's Mars placements. Matt's Mars is in Aries and mine is in Libra. And so for me, with a Mars in Libra, I think it comes down to balancing my needs with what's really possible and real. Balancing this like progressive sort of change oriented spirit that I have with what's actually possible in the world that we live in, and not that my imagination of what the world could be isn't possible, but I've got to sort of run it against what already exists. Taking my time, big thing for me, very impatient, got to remember to balance and have to remember that what I imagine won't come to fruition just immediately, but it's going to take some time to build. And the biggest one perhaps for me is letting go of defensiveness. So knowing that people are going to see me in whatever way they see me, that's on them, that's not on me, and letting go of the need to defend myself against maybe how other people are perceiving me. For Matt, with his Mars and Aries, I think this is just a really big message to go for it. Put those things out there in the world, throw it out there, because I think you're also, and I've looked at your chart extensively, obviously, you're supported in a lot of ways that will bring what you're imagining to fruition when you act on it. So by kind of looking at that, and Mars for you also is in, your Mars is in the 5th house, which means go for it, but make it fun. Use your creativity. Find that childlike spirit and the love for what you're doing. And when you do that, you'll be able to conquer that fear. And my Mars is found in the 4th house, which has to do with safety and security in the world. So I've got to keep myself secure and not get too much into the imagination, what I want to build, so much so that I'm losing my footing, my financial footing, even in the physical world. I have to make sure to balance my imagination with my reality. So this is a way that we can look at our individual fears by looking at maybe where our natural fear lies with Saturn, understanding how we sort of put our courage and bravery to the test with our Mars. But you can also use astrology to look at the fear patterns and aspects within the world at large too. So Genevieve Vierling, who is a professional astrologer, wrote this wonderful 2-part blog on fear and astrology that I highly recommend. And she explores some of the bigger world events that encompass fear, like hurricanes or even conjoined twins being separated, and what was going on astrologically when those things were occurring. She goes into some great depth about the astrology of fear and how it translates into the actual world. Because fear plays out on both an individual and global scale. And it's important to know what you are individually fearful of and how that contributes to the greater collective, as well as looking at the astrology of the world right now as it is today and understanding where those planet placements are and how that coincides with your own. So I think a really interesting thing that we see, Matt, between sort of the psychological approach and the astrological approach, you mentioned fears that are taught. And I think that goes along really well with sort of what I mentioned in the beginning about those unrealistic fears. I think most of the fears that we're taught are unrealistic, right? Those things of being afraid of success, being afraid of failure, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's some overlap there, I think, for us, where talking about rational and irrational fears and the benefits of one over the other, in psychology, the irrational fears are what we call phobias. So it's things that it doesn't necessarily make sense to be afraid of. Whereas rational fears, obviously, like logical thought went into it, not necessarily logical conscious thought, but there's logic behind it. And so I think when we talk about those, it's interesting to see some of the parallels between the two, astrology and psychology, in that regard, at least. And I think a lot of the conversation that we have revolves around more of the irrational fear. And if it's irrational, probably makes sense that we should try to correct it, account for it, do something to accommodate that fear.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a lot of what our episodes are around, is just What's on our mind, what's holding us back, like this quote kind of said, like what is keeping us from moving to the next level, and where are we letting it have power over us versus providing ourselves with the Batman power to like take it to the next level. I think in some situations, in some cases, very helpful to getting to the root of that fear and then letting it dissolve. Because what I also love about Zachleen's approach is she mentions at the very, very end of her writing on fear here, she says, the concept of easier said than done does not apply here. Because when you know the roots of your fears, it's so easy to let them go and allow yourself to experience life to the fullest. And I think there's a lot of people who would argue with that and be like, well, it's not that easy. Like, I can't just say I'm afraid of spiders and let it go today. Like, that's not going to happen. And I think it's possible. So I wonder what your take on that is.
If it's a true fear, if it's like a true phobia, I would say that it's not necessarily possible to get rid of it in a day. But I think that's where we see some of the treatments that I was talking about come in. Systematic desensitization is like the process of saying, let's use a different example. Let's say fear of flying. Well, the first part of systematic desensitization might be sitting in a room with a therapist or whatever, and talking through what it might be like to get on a plane and just talking about it. You're not on a plane, you're not gonna get on a plane, you're just talking. And then the next one might be like, maybe we pull up a YouTube video of flying on a plane. And then maybe sometime I ask you to go to an airport and just watch some planes take off. And eventually you get to the point where you've limited that fear response. Your amygdala stops freaking out so much that then it is like, okay, I can get on a plane and maybe I'm anxious the whole time. Maybe I'm uncomfortable, but at least it's not this debilitating fear. So I think I would disagree that you can just, snap your finger and boom, it's over and I'm not afraid of it anymore. But I do think that any fear can be conquered.
Yeah, and I think that's cool that we come to a little bit of difference in opinion on that, because I'm of the school of thought that our minds are really, really powerful. And it's funny that you mentioned the fear of flying, because I had that where, like, anytime I was getting on a plane, it was like, this is terrifying. Anytime there was turbulence, I was like, it's going down, it's over. And one day, I just decided, I'm not doing this. I'm not. And someone told me, I think, a fact that like more car accidents happen than plane stuff happens. And that did it for me. It was like, okay, I can get on this plane. Whatever's going to happen, happens. Here we go. And that was it. I agree in a different respect that I think it depends on how deeply rooted the fear is and what sort of responses that brings up in you. Because like while I wasn't like shaking or like feeling lightheaded or anything when I was flying, it could very well be that developed in somebody else, and they're not going to have the same experience of being like, oh, let me just turn this off real quick. In which case, I think the steps that you mentioned are awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's important to set those expectations too, where I think that there are some things where you can just do it, and I don't even necessarily know that that's 100% conquering the fear. I think when I think back to, you mentioned earlier that you were afraid of the dark, right? And so everybody has that fear when they turn off the lights and then they have to go up the stairs to get to their room or out of the basement or whatever it is. And it's like, I better run up these stairs or something's going to get me. I think as adults, we can put that out of our minds and say, I'm not going to worry about this. I'm going to walk up these stairs. I am the master of my house. Nothing in this basement is going to get me. All that kind of stuff. But I don't think that you've truly conquered that instinctual fear of the darkness behind you, right? And I think that that's an important expectation, and something that I would really want people to take away from this episode about fear is maybe you get lucky the way that you did and you can, snap your fingers and recover from that fear. But I think most of the time, a true fear, a true phobia, you're not going to be able to just get rid of that easily. And if it's something that is debilitating to you or something that you want to overcome, you should expect that it's going to take some time.
Right. And I would add to that, like, you're right. I think it is a practice. Whether you are able to overcome it in a day or whether it takes you a year, it's going to continue to be a practice. Just a reminder that we are powerful. Like, your mind is a powerful tool. Use it as such. It loves to kind of take on a life of its own. And that's where we start to get into the autopilot of letting our mind run us instead of running our mind. And so it is that practice of, okay, this is a deep phobia I have that, like you said, is debilitating to me. It's not allowing me to live my life in the way I want to. How can I use my mind around that to start to orient myself toward using it as a power and using my mind as the powerful tool that it is? And all of the ways that you mentioned of starting to confront that are really, really powerful and taking some of those steps forward. I think, as well as looking at your astrology and discovering what you're working with. This week's tarot card is the Queen of Pentacles. The Queen of Pentacles is loving, mothering energy. She wants to nourish those she loves with support and comfort. You're being called to look at your work life and home life balance and make sure you're nurturing yourself enough. Nurturing and growing ourselves takes time and work that not only has to be balanced with our work, but also the needs of others. Keep in mind, the more you nurture and invest in yourself, the more you're able to give and share with others. By working on getting yourself to a place of prosperity, security, and comfort, you're better able to provide that for others. If you or someone close to you right now is struggling, remember to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. You're no use if you're passed out.
It's a little bit of flight safety for the girl who says she's afraid of flying. I like it.
Hey, I listened.
Look at you go. You were probably the one taking notes during the safety demonstration.
Definitely raising my hand, being like, just want to be clear, where are the exits again? All that jazz.
When I hear the words self-nurture, I think of Parks and Rec, treat yourself. I could probably do a whole series of wellness tips on the psychological benefits of treating yourself, but since Halloween is right around the corner, I am choosing to focus on chocolate. Go ahead and eat a couple small pieces of dark chocolate every couple of days. Your tummy will thank you, but so will your brain. In general, dark chocolate has a few nutritional benefits over the other chocolate varieties, including my personal favorite, milk chocolate. But most importantly, for this particular segment at least, it increases brain function. There's a couple things in dark chocolate, flavanol, theobromine, and caffeine that increase mental acuity, but they also have other positive effects on your body, lower blood pressure, increasing good cholesterol while decreasing bad cholesterol, good antioxidants, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's very easy for us to say sugar bad, no eat chocolate. But I think within moderation, a little bit of dark chocolate might be something good for you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Full Circle, the Magic Mindset Podcast. If you want to learn more about us or hear previous episodes, you can visit lealily.com/fullcirclepodcast. There you can find previous episodes and also our show notes where we include previous tarot pulls, links, and more extras from each of our episodes. You can also engage with us on Twitter at @fullcircle_POD. And we also have a community on Facebook under Full Circle, the Magic Mindset Podcast, where we hope to communicate and talk with you. You can share your insights, your thoughts on our themes, and more in that community. If you want to listen to more of our episodes, we are on Spotify and iTunes, and also on my website. We release new episodes every Monday. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.